Well, it is afternoon time, and that it means it is panel time. And our first moderator of our first panel is Chief of the Section of General Pediatrics, and he is also Medical Director of Pediatric Ambulatory Care at St. Vincent's Hospital, right here in New York City. Also Assistant Professor of Pediatrics at NYU, at New York Medical College, pardon me. And he is particularly active in evidence-based pediatrics. And of course, this is something we're talking about here extensively today with Steve Novella about the notion of science-based medicine, and nowhere perhaps could that be more compelling and pressing an issue when it comes to treating our children. He's interested in medical myths and how those medical myths are perpetrated and used by parents, and also talks about vaccine myths, certainly what dangerous medical threat to life as we know it today. So without further ado, to moderate our first panel this afternoon, please welcome to the stage John Snyder. John.
Thank you, sir.
You bet.
Can you hear me? Okay, it really is a privilege to be here again at NECSS and to be moderating the panel that you're about to meet, an exceptional group of people that should be a really exciting panel. It's also an extremely important topic that we're going to talk about today. For a variety of reasons, which I'm going to get into in a minute. I think probably it goes without saying that many of you are concerned about the increasing prevalence of irrational thinking and practice as it pertains to medicine and healthcare. Is that true? Would you say you all feel that way? Whether it's a friend of yours who is afraid to vaccinate their child because of the pervasive myth that vaccines cause autism, or your aunt who swears that every winter the homeopathic medicine that she takes prevents her from getting the flu. And it is Homeopathy Awareness Week, I think that was brought up earlier. And homeopathy is a great example of really the most magical, maybe the most prevalent of the so-called alternative medicines that are used today, and certainly one of the most magical ones. And we're concerned about things like homeopathy, not so much because they're dangerous in and of themselves, although many alternative medicines and therapy modalities can be dangerous, like chelation for autism, for example. But for the most part, we're worried about these methods because of what it says about the distancing that society is finding between itself and rationalism and science in particular. And this is a particular concern to us in medicine. The more we see this type of thinking in action, the further and further we see ourselves moving away from science and reality, which is particularly concerning in medicine. But maybe even more concerning than that is the way, and maybe some of you aren't aware of this, the way this quackery is infiltrating itself into mainstream medical academia. And this is what this panel is going to talk about today. And this is a very troubling trend that we're seeing right now. We're in one of the greatest cities on earth. It also happens to be a center for woo, or quackery in medicine. And there is almost not a medical institution in this city that hasn't been infiltrated by it at the highest levels. And we're going to talk about that today. I think I need a remote control for the laptop. I have a few slides. All right. I have never done this before, by the way, moderated a panel, so I'm a little nervous, but I'm also very excited. This is an amazing group of people that I'm going to introduce in a minute. So, I recently got a flyer in the mail for this book, Mental Health Naturally, the Family Guide to Holistic Care for a Healthy Mind and Body. Now, at the very bottom, you may not be able to see what I circled there. It's put out by the American Academy of Pediatrics. The author, Kathy J. Kemper, MD, MPH. By the way, this is the news release. They wanted to make sure they let the media know that they're putting out this book. Here is the author. She is also the chief of the section on complementary and integrative medicine of the American Academy of Pediatrics. This is a very troubling development at the AAP. I am a fellow of the AAP, although that might change soon. Although she purports to be very evidence-based, when you start looking closely at her at the website, this section of the AAP's website, you'll see links to other websites that tout homeopathy, craniosacral therapy, etc. Here at my institution, by the way, I'm no longer at St. Vincent's because St. Vincent's doesn't really exist anymore. I'm now about to start a new job at Bay State Children's Hospital in Springfield, Massachusetts, and I'm going to be working at Tufts, which, by the way, also has a complementary and integrative medicine center. So I'll be busy. But I found this at St. Vincent's, the acupuncture clinic, now accepting HealthNet, Landmark, and Empire Blue Cross Blue Shield for certain conditions. I wonder what those are. So New York City is rife with academic woo. There's a lot of great healthcare in this city, but there's a lot of quackery. So Continuum Health Partners, the umbrella of Beth Israel Medical Center, Roosevelt Hospital, St. Luke's, Long Island College Hospital, and the New York Eye and Ear Infirmary, all great institutions, hosts this, the Center for Health and Healing. You're going to be hearing more about this, I think, from the panel, I hope. This is a mega site center of woo right here in New York City. Just as an example, here's their pediatric homeopathy section run by Dr. Natalie Stern. She purports to treat all sorts of pediatric ailments with magic, including asthma, very serious conditions. But Beth Israel Department of Integrative Medicine also has a Reiki for orthopedic surgery. Hopefully they also use anesthesia. This is apparently what their anesthesia looks like. And then there's the Rosenthal Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine. I know I'm stepping on toes, but I'm just showing you slides. They're going to talk about this stuff. Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, you've heard of them? Well, they're in the act too. And my alma mater, Mount Sinai School of Medicine, a great institution, they almost had a center, but they do have a student group, Students for Integrative Medicine. This is why this panel is so important. You know, the adolescent question asker earlier who said, you know, what is it about adolescents? Why can't they get into this stuff? Well, you think that's bad. How about the medical students and the residents learning to be doctors who are brought up now in a system where all of this is okay? Well, it's not okay. So without further ado, oh, by the way, this is the Consortium of Academic Health Centers for Integrative Medicine. It's all over the country. So without further ado, I want to introduce a really esteemed panel of speakers. First up is Dr. David Gorski, who's an editor at Science-Based Medicine. By the way, this is a science-based medicine panel. Sciencebasedmedicine.org. For those of you who don't know it, there may be something wrong with you, but you need to go check that out. So David Gorski is an editor of SBM. He's Associate Professor of Surgery, Wayne State University, program leader of the Breast Cancer Center. By the way, I think I'm outing him right now. For those of you who don't know, he's also ORAC.
Who's that?
Next up is Kimball Atwood. Dr. Atwood is also editor at SBM. He's a fellow for the Committee of Skeptical Inquiry, assistant clinical professor at Tufts. I also will be at Tufts. And Kimball, are you coming? And you know the next member is Stephen Novella. Dr. Novella is a senior editor at SBM, fellow of CSI, and director of general neurology at Yale University School of Medicine, which unfortunately is also woo infested. So I think I spoke probably longer than I should have. I want to start with right away with the panel with Dr. Gorski. He's going to talk a little bit about his experiences, and again, the panel is graciously going to try to focus some degree on the local area, New York City, because it is just so infiltrated, but it's really all over the country. So Dr. Gorski, why don't you take it away?
Thanks, John. Because we're all physicians, we all have to have PowerPoint, even for like a 5 or 10 minute opening introductions here. And mine is going to be essentially a quick overview of the topic. I have to give this disclaimer. I've been told by my institution, the contents of this talk represent my opinion alone. They don't represent the opinions of Wayne State University or Carmanos Cancer Institute, although they should. If that's not made sufficiently clear, my mildly, modestly promising academic career may suddenly and regrettably snuff it. All right, so what is quackademic medicine? I wish I could take credit for the term, but I can't. The best that I can track down is that a Dr. Robert Donald, otherwise known as Dr. RW, if any of you read his blog, coined the term 2 or 3 years ago, quackademic medicine, to describe the infiltration of pseudoscience and alternative medicine modalities into traditional medical centers. And I think you probably recognize some of these rogues at the bottom. That guy on the bottom left-hand corner there is not James Randi. But there is sort of a mild resemblance. Dean Ornish and, of course, Dr. Oz. You'll be hearing about some of these characters throughout the panel. Okay. This is sort of my biased interpretation of what is and is not quackademic medicine. Acupuncture, I think, most of the time is quackademic medicine. Homeopathy, without a doubt, it's magic, it's water, okay? Chiropractic, I've called chiropractic, chiropractors are basically physical therapists with delusions of grandeur. As long as they stick to the spine and like muscle, kind of muscle techniques, they might have some use, but when they start saying they can treat asthma or colic, right out. Cupping, naturopathy, any sort of energy healing, okay, that's magic. Okay, it's either magic or religion. Reiki, for instance, is nothing more than faith healing with Eastern mysticism as opposed to, Judeo-Christian religion as its basis. Now, gray areas. I put acupuncture in both categories because there is some, it can be a gray area. There's some of the studies, when there are good studies that are well designed with placebos that show a negative result, that I don't know that that's necessarily quackademic medicine. The problem is, as Steve has pointed out many times, after they get those negative studies, acupuncturists tend to want to go back to studies that are guaranteed for the bias to give them a seemingly positive results. Supplements, I think it depends on what the study is. I mean, there have been some good studies of things like glucosamine, St. John's wort, that sort of thing. Mind-body interventions can also potentially go either way, depending on what the study is. And some forms of exercise that are lumped with CAM, like yoga, if you strip it of its mystical stuff, is nothing more than mild exercise. Same thing with Tai Chi. Not woo. Well, natural products pharmacology is a long, standing discipline that has, contributed greatly to the armamentarium of drugs that we all use. It's not woo. The problem is it falls under CAM all too often. I'll get into that in a minute. Studying interactions between herbal remedies and pharmaceuticals, obviously. And exercise, nutrition, and diet. How is it that these became alternative? Somebody explain that one to me. I don't know. But that's why I think nutrition, exercise, herbal medicines, these are what I call Trojan horses for quackery. The CAM movement has basically taken these, and said that this is alternative, and there may be a small point that perhaps conventional medicine didn't pay as much attention to some of this stuff as it might have, but that doesn't necessarily make it alternative. The problem is they take nutrition and exercise, and then that's the label on the side of the Trojan horse. And then when the Trojan horse is into academia, all the woo comes out. And as we say, beware of Greeks bearing gifts. One of the big impetuses for this is it tends to be wealthy donors, actually. And the biggest, baddest one on the block is the Bravewell Consortium, which you may have heard of. It's a consortium of academic health centers for integrative medicine. Look at some of the members. I only selected a few. Sadly, my alma mater is one of them, University of Michigan. Sadly, the place that I used to be employed until 2 years ago, UMDNJ, is one of them. Steve, Yale, Harvard, big names. Albert Einstein, which I'll talk about more in just less than a minute here. And while I was trying to update my academic woo aggregator, it turns out that the Bravewell Consortium is at least at least three quarters of the of the membership of the aggregator. Without going too much into it, and I'm not going to, I might just blow through these fairly fast. These were founded by, this is founded basically by the wife of a very wealthy man, John Mack, who was a former CEO and current chairman of the board for Morgan Stanley. And their idea is they want to transform healthcare by, they say it means moving the boundaries of the existing field of medicine to include the wisdom inherent in healing the whole person, mind, body, and spirit. Whether you believe that a spirit exists or not, it's not really science-based here as far as I'm concerned. And looking at their 2007 awards, I found this picture on the web. This is, and there's a guy who looks like James Randi again, but you can see this is like some heavy hitters. You got Mehmet Oz, Mehmet Oz, Andrew Weil, Larry Dawsey, Dean Ornish. These are big names in CAM. And they're successful. With Bravewell's financial support, the consortium, this is from their website. With Bravewell's financial support, the Consortium of Academic Health Centers has grown from 4 members to 42 member schools and 44 medical centers. And they're having success. I won't talk much about NCAM. We've talked about it on science-based medicine a lot, but there's definitely, and of course, Kimball will mention NCAM, I'm sure, in his little introduction. Suffice it to say, almost 20 years and over $1 billion spent, they have not really validated any alt-med therapy. Now, what happens? Well, I'm getting back to the Center for Health and Healing, which John mentioned. Unfortunately, it's affiliated with Albert Einstein College of Medicine, located primarily at Beth Israel Medical Center, but it's all affiliated with that whole Continuum Healthcare Partners group. And well, let's take a look at their website. You may not be able to read it from back in the nosebleed seats, but it's all there: acupuncture, acupressure, aromatherapy, chiropractic, craniosacral therapy, Feldenkrais, homeopathy, therapeutic touch, Rolfing. Do you know what Rolfing is? It's not barfing, although that does make me want to barf. It's basically an idea that you by releasing the fascia and like really heavy, deep massage, you can cure all sorts of ills. I have personally seen patients with breast cancer who tried to Rolf their tumors away. Pediatric homeopathy, and I'm going to blow through this because he already stole my thunder, but that's okay. The same quote. I will, however, emphasize one different part of it. Basically, why not treat children's ailments with the safest medicines possible? Well, I won't argue that it's probably the safest medicine possible. Of course, it's water. This is in an academic health center. Academic health centers are supposed to be the forefront of science. Science, not magic. There's the Urban Zen initiative also at Beth Israel, and this is, the wealthy patron comes in again, and this is Donna Karen, who at the time said she hopes to prove that Urban Zen can reduce the classic symptoms of cancer treatment. And it's some of the usual characters, like a lot of them are what I call the gateway modalities of CAM that lead to the harder stuff, like yoga. And again, I have nothing against yoga, as you strip it of its mystical, aspect, and it's exercise. Essential oil therapy, Reiki, the usual stuff. There are now even graduate fellowships in Woo. At Beth Israel, they have an inpatient fellowship in acupuncture, and the goal, as they say, is to integrate acupuncture into inpatient care. Why? They have an academic integrative medical fellowship that includes Reiki, East Asian medicine, homeopathy, acupuncture. This is an academic institution. they're going even beyond that, thanks to the man who looks like James Randi again. An integrative medicine and residency system. Right now it's at 4 medical centers, but in 2008 it was opened up to new residency sites anywhere, and the idea is to add a component of integrative medicine to various residency programs such as pediatrics, OBGYN, internal medicine, psychiatry. So this is me about 2.5 years ago, almost 3 years ago, in front of the London Homeopathic Hospital, the Royal London Homeopathic Hospital. Oddly, you may be aware of some of the reports in England about how, the recent government report that said homeopathy is not evidence-based, and actually the government seems to be pulling away from homeopathy, Prince Charles notwithstanding. We seem to be going in the opposite direction here across the pond. So the question, is resistance futile? Now, Kimball, I think, will be now telling us why we should resist, and Steve will tell us his story of trying to resist. Kimball.
Thank you very much. Going to open with a short video presentation.
It's only a couple minutes.
So Suzanne Summers has a new book out called Knockout, and it's all about doctors using alternative methods like nutrition to cure cancer. Suzanne joins us right now from New York with one of those renegade doctors. Hey, Suzanne, how you doing?
Thanks, Mario. I'm so excited to be here for Extra, and I've got a real life changer for you. A guy who's not only changing people's lives, but saving people's lives, Dr. Nick Gonzalez.
He's an extra life changer and a renegade cancer doctor.
You treat cancer patients in a way that's different than conventional medicine. How do you treat cancer patients?
Our program is nutritionally based. It has 3 general components:
Coffee
diet,
enemas.
supplements, and detoxification. Not synthetic drugs, not pharmaceuticals, not radiation.
Step 1, an individualized organic diet tailored specifically to you.
They're all based on organic food, whole foods, no white sugar, white flour, white junk, no chemical foods.
His protocol also includes high doses of specific supplements, including pancreatic enzymes.
Pancreatic enzymes, tell me what they do.
They've been known to be the main digestive product in the intestinal tract. They're produced in the pancreas, secreted into the intestine. We believe the pancreatic enzymes have a very powerful anti-cancer effect.
And listen to this, his detoxification method includes coffee enemas, and he says they rid the body of toxic waste.
So let's go to the most controversial part, which are the coffee enemas. Why can't we just drink coffee?
When you drink coffee, it tends to suppress the liver. When you take coffee as an enema rectally, the caffeine stimulates certain nerves in the lower bowel that through a reflex stimulate the liver to release all its toxins.
Suzanne profiles Dr. Gonzalez and some of his patients in her blockbuster new book, Knockout.
I think anybody looking at the two of you have got to understand that you are 2 living miracles.
Rafaela and Hester insist they're living proof this treatment works.
I've had breast cancer, rectal cancer, and lung cancer.
I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, stage 4 in 92.
Stage 4 ovarian cancer, that's usually a death sentence.
They both beat the odds. Dr. Gonzalez crafted specific protocols for both ladies. He told Rafaela she must avoid acidic foods.
Ovarian cancer is happy in an acidic environment, so I try to stay my pH a little more alkaline wherever possible.
Hester and Rafaela also take high doses of nutritional supplements.
It's up to 172 a day. But they're all things that have to keep whatever's happening in my body on an even keel.
Mario, it's no secret anymore. Eat as if your life depends on it, because it does. Back to you.
Thank you, Suzanne. That's great advice.
Who here is surprised that a coffee enema might stimulate certain nerve endings in the colon? Is that
The only way to get caffeine faster, I think, would be to inject it
mainline
IV.
it? I'm thinking mainlining the coffee.
Yeah.
By the way, that was not meant to be a comedy, just so for those of you.
People don't believe me when I tell them coffee enemas. But
What are the odds on stage 4 ovarian cancer?
low, but not zero.
I think Gorski needs to open his mind a little more, to tell you the truth.
If I open it anymore, my brains will fall out my ears.
Well, Nicholas Gonzalez lives in New York, has practiced in New York for a couple of decades almost, during the mid-90s, came this close to having his license to practice medicine stripped by the New York State Medical Board for very good reasons, and was saved really at the bell by the rise of this kind of junk being perpetrated, as it were, by the National Institutes for Health, and also with great help from certain Congress people, particularly the Congressman Dan Burton of Indiana. And it led ultimately to his method being done as a trial courtesy of Columbia University. And you know, if the Beth Israel Center for Health and Healing is the mother of all CAM practice in New York City, Columbia University is certainly the mother of all unethical trials of implausible medical claims at Columbia University. And if you want to find out in excruciating detail the history and details of this particular trial, I suggest that you look at our blog, Science-Based Medicine. Not only did it involve the systematic torture of experimental subjects, really without any basis for ever doing so, but it ultimately was published years later, just this past fall, and the results were exactly as predicted, that it was not only not as good as standard therapy, which isn't very good for cancer of the pancreas, which is what they studied it for, but it was actually far worse than that standard therapy. But we all knew that to begin with. So Columbia also has, courtesy of some wealthy people, the Richard and Hinda Rosenthal Center for Complementary Medicine. And it doesn't take very much digging to find statements there that betray more than merely the notion that we're going to try to make patients feel a little better with so-called complementary techniques. If you read this, you'll see that Carol Ann Schwartz died of lung cancer despite the interventions of conventional medicine, and her family had sought alternative treatments that might have helped her, but had to do so outside of the medical profession, and alas, too late. The clear message is that she could have been cured of her cancer by alternative methods. So on the one hand, our colleagues in academic medicine repeatedly attempt to convince us that, gee, this really isn't a replacement for scientific medicine, it's just a complement. But the reality is that whether they know it or not, many patients think differently about it, and for that matter, so do many of the practitioners that are embraced by some of these otherwise relatively evidence-based colleagues. More in the Rosenthal Center, it only takes 2 clicks from the beginning to find that Dana Ullman's website, Homeopathic Educational Services, which is at the the bottom of this, is touted, which is essentially full of the most ridiculous nonsense imaginable. I mean, there's just no other way to put it. And of course, Columbia spawned Mehmet Oz, who is now on the Oprah show, as most of you know. So look down near the bottom of this and see that if you want to get him to speak, and by the way, he is speaking today about a stone's throw from this building, together with another advocate, Deepak Chopra, most of you have heard of him, at a health fair sponsored by the New York Times. And guess how much they're probably paying him, assuming that he usually commands this kind of fee. So he's in the $5 fee range. And what that means is more than $40,001.
Is that more than we're making?
That is... I think
that's
for appearing here, yes.
Wait. Where's Michael Feldman? What are we getting for this?
I want to bring this up.
Well, you've seen this slide before too. Switch to Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, where there's an integrative medicine program run by Dr. Barry Cassileth, who is a little bit different from some of the others. She's a medical sociologist who, in the 1980s, was a pretty good skeptic about what at the time was called holistic medicine, or maybe it was beginning to be called alternative medicine. The term CAM, or integrative medicine, didn't even exist yet. She wrote a pretty good article in the aftermath of the downfall of Laetrile, the great cancer quack therapy that essentially met its demise in about 1982. And somewhat later, she wrote a couple of papers with one of our mentors and fellow science-based medicine bloggers, Wally Sampson. But then, apparently, she was seduced by the dark side and decided that she could have some sort of an integrative medicine program for cancer patients who were clearly, hurting in lots of ways, not merely worrying about whether they might be cured of their disease, without somehow mixing it with the really bad stuff. And what she does is distinguish between the term complementary and the term alternative. Complementary good, alternative bad. You've already heard a little bit about that here. But I have to tell you that just in the interest of fairness, in a sense, and because of her pedigree, I tried to get her to come here today, and she couldn't. But she did send me a couple of things that I think are worth reading, because this is not an absolutely black and white issue. For example, she was one of the best opponents of the Gonzalez regimen, the guy that we just had the video about. Back in the 90s, she called it, for example, voodoo magic, silly, not scientific, worse than not scientific. This is pure ridiculousness. Well, anybody who says that, you're thinking, gee, she's one of us, and not afraid to say it. Unfortunately, when the trial began, she went public with her approval of the fact of the trial, as though, okay, that's important to show whether or not it works, for a number of reasons that I can't get into here, but are all over science-based medicine. That doesn't really cut it either scientifically or ethically. But here's what Barry Cassileth wrote to me. There is no way you would quarrel with what we do, meaning now this Sloan Kettering Integrative Medicine Center. First of all, complementary therapies, which is what integrative oncology is about, do not treat cancer. They control physical and emotional sequelae of cancer and its treatments. Secondly, I spend half my time working with government agencies against quackery and the other half working on and promoting evidence-based symptom control practices. In every talk I give, regardless of where in the world it may be, and for every audience, I include discussion of the persistent quackery that abounds in all developed countries. Blah, 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 blah. There are 6 major programmatic areas in my integrative medicine department. One is music therapy, which is largely an inpatient set of activities. The brief message below came yesterday from a nurse clinical specialist in pain and palliative care, an MSKCC department from which we receive many referrals daily. Alessandro is one of our remarkable music therapists. Please read it, thanks. And here was the message. I just wanted to thank you for promptly responding to my request for music therapy for Mr. Goins. Oh, I shouldn't have said that, sorry about that. The Fed. Alessandro arrived soon after we spoke. As he started to play, I could almost immediately see the patient begin to rest more comfortably. When he finished the first song, he asked the patient's mother what type of music the patient likes. She said he liked all music, but then requested Alessandro to play Amazing Grace. As he played, the patient's mother stroked her son's hair and sang softly to him. As he came to the end of the song, the patient took his last breath and peacefully died. It was a very powerful and emotional experience. I am so thankful we were able to offer this service to our patients and their families. Well, I have no quarrel with that, and I doubt that anyone in here would either. But I would argue that that isn't really what we're against. It's important to have a tough mind and a tender heart, and that sounds to me like a tender heart. I don't believe it's necessary to even study something like that to find out whether it might be helpful for people. If they feel that it is, great. We should do that sort of thing. What I don't think we need to do is give it a misleading label that then becomes the Trojan horse that allows all sorts of other things to come in along with it. And on that note, I'll turn it over to Steve.
Thanks.
I think we only have, Steve, I think we have like 5. And then, I don't know if we're going to have time for questions. We'll leave it up to the people behind in the wings. We're good. Okay, so we'll go with Steve, and we'll see if we have time for questions.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Thanks for leading up. So, why are the three of us sitting up here? Why are we running science-based medicine? I do feel it's important to get the basic premise out there that we are not, as I think a question I answered during the SGU taping. This is not about specific beliefs or modalities. This is about methods. Science-based medicine is just using those modalities that are based upon evidence and also a growing body of scientific knowledge based upon our understanding of how the bodies work. That's it. Just a consistent application of a methodology. The problem with CAM is that it's not defined by methodology. It's everything but science-based medicine, and science-based medicine is defined by a methodology, but CAM tries to define itself by a list of things, by something else. And they really have a hard time when you try to pin them down. When the three of us sat with the director of the National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine, Josephine Briggs, she basically admitted you can't define CAM. She's the director of a center of CAM at the NIH, and she can't define it because there really is no definition. There are no cohesive principles, and what it turns into practically is anything which falls short of the methods of science-based medicine. It's unscientific medicine. However, it needs these other labels in order to infiltrate the institutions of medicine. That's what we're talking about mainly today. The infiltration of unscientific medicine, what used to be called health fraud, was unapologetically labeled as fraud up to about 20 years ago, maybe a little bit more, has now been utterly rebranded as alternative, complementary, integrative, CAM, whatever. They pulled it off. They won. They did it. They got the label changed. They got fraud labeled as CAM, and now we're doing damage control. That's where we are right now. I've been at Yale for a long time, and I have been paying attention to the infiltration of unscientific medicine into Yale. But it was sort of creeping in around the edges, but nothing too serious, nothing that I could really do anything about. Nurses for a long time at Yale New Haven Hospital were into Reiki. They have a totally separate hierarchy. There's really nothing I could do about that, except maybe just write about it or expose it, but nothing administratively. But then a student group formed, a student group of interest in CAM. Again, it's a student group. It's students have the right to form interest groups in whatever they want, so there really wasn't anything to do about that either. I've always incorporated critical thinking into my teaching of medical students, and my experience, 95+% of medical students are pretty hardcore science-based and understand critical thinking and have no problem. Then there's the 5%, which is actually pretty much what we experience with the medical profession. About 5% of physicians are enamored of spiritual, religion, or unscientific modalities, where 95% just don't want to bother with it. Same experience with the students at Yale. So the student group, however, led to a symposium on integrative medicine. Then it became a problem, because now you had the Yale University name being attached to a symposium on complementary and alternative medicine, inviting in the likes of David Katz, who's a local promoter of alternative medicine in New Haven, like an adjunct, professor, not a full-time faculty at Yale, and that got worldwide attention. That actually got the attention of a lot of my colleagues, even across the pond. Like, CAM at Yale. That's basically, that equaled CAM at Yale, even though it was a student group leading to a symposium and nothing really else. But that got me in front of the dean that's in charge of medical school education to talk about this before it evolved into a broader problem, which it was rapidly doing. Because now you have a core of people, vast minority, but all it takes is one or two students, one or two faculty, and they're off to the races. That's unfortunately how easy it is to infiltrate academic institutions. And it was a learning experience, this exchange, for both myself and for the dean. The dean was what we now call, and Val Jones, who couldn't be here today, unfortunately, coined this term, as far as I'm aware of, as shruggy. Shruggy is a professional, a physician who doesn't know, doesn't care. Alternative medicine, whatever, it's got to be harmless, right? Why would people be doing it? There's an NCAM and stuff. It has the trappings, so I'm not going to worry about it. There's other people out there worrying about it. Good for them. I'm not going to worry about it. A shruggy. That was basically my dean. Really had no idea what it was all about. It was totally innocent, and students are interested in it, great, yeah, symposium, it's bringing in money, awesome, but that was about as far as his knowledge went. So I really started to have a discourse with him about this. So one thing I learned was that he had no idea about the whole thing. The second thing I learned is how this was proceeding at Yale, and it was very deliberately under the radar. There was no debate. The faculty had no idea this was happening, except for those two that were interested, right? It was completely under the radar. And I brought this up to him. I said, this has been happening completely behind the scenes, and there's no awareness among the faculty at Yale that this is happening. And his answer was, well, that's because if people were aware this was happening, they would oppose it. And he thought that was a good answer. Yeah, of course that people would oppose it, because it's the infiltration of unscientific ideology into science-based medicine. Don't you think that the faculty should know about this? And let's have an open public conversation about it before we start allowing Yale and the Yale name to be exploited for the promotion of unscientific modalities. The only way I got his attention, by the way, is when I made an analogy between this and the infiltration of creationism into universities. Then suddenly I got his attention. He got that. He understood that creationism infiltrating universities under the guise of academic freedom was bogus. I said, that's exactly the same thing. Now we have the infiltration of unscientific medicine into academia under the guise of healthcare freedom. It's the exact same thing. I don't know that he quite got that the analogy was identical, but at least I got his attention by using the C word, right, creationism. So he was aware of that.
Steve, would this run counter to anything in the medical school's charter or mission? Could you use that?
Probably. Well, I have to tell the story a little bit further. So if they really started to promote things which were against patients' interests or unscientific, you could probably make a case there. But the problem is the Trojan horse approach, right? And I actually use the bait and switch analogy, but it's the same basic thing, where you're selling one thing, but right behind it, the switch it's the homeopathy, acupuncture, all the bogus unscientific modalities. I'll mention another aspect of the bait and switch that these guys didn't bring up, and that's patient-centered medicine. Has anyone here ever heard that term? It's the notion that we're going to focus our treatments on what's best for the patient, not what's best for the system or the medical establishment or the hospital or the doctor, not what's most convenient for us, but what's most convenient for the patient. We heartily endorse that approach to medicine. And yes, that's one of those things that we need to constantly remind ourselves about as a profession and as a business and an institution, that we can't forget the fact this is all ultimately about the patient and not about the things that we need to do to keep functioning. So what happened at Yale and the people that were really promoting it that I came up against, that's how they sold it. This is all just about being patient-centered and doing things that are nice and touchy-feely for the patients. Why are you against that? What's your problem? You have some kind of axe to grind? I'm almost quoting verbatim their response to me. And say, yeah, but it's not just about that. That's the bait and switch. Now, this all came to a head when they actually tried to insert CAM into the curriculum of the medical school education. And then I also discovered that they were being required to do that by the accrediting agency. So the body that accredits medical schools now require medical schools to teach about alternative medicine. So Yale, what could Yale do? They said, we're being required to maintain our accreditation. We can't not do this. I said, well, okay, but let me be involved at least. Let's at least make sure that it's being done scientifically and not, we don't want to promote pseudoscience. Of course not. We don't want to promote pseudoscience. So the whole thing happened again by the promoters, and they had a curriculum and everything. And luckily, I was actually on the curriculum committee already, but I have allies on the curriculum committee as well, and they kept me in the loop where necessary. So finally, we had the big meeting where we're going to review the new CAM curriculum at Yale for the medical students. And I kept telling them, because I had looked through it, I'm like, this is really scary stuff that's in here. It's very unscientific. It's not just this patient-centered, touchy-feely stuff. It's actually some really hardcore pseudoscience. And they were going, yeah, really, is it? Wow, we should look into that. And then the proponents hit back with all of their rhetoric, all the stuff that they use, again, to infiltrate academia, because they know the kind of stuff to say when you're talking to academics, right? When you're talking to true believers or proponents, it's a different story. But when you're talking to academics, oh, yes, we're evidence-based. Absolutely. It's all about being patient-centered. They have their rhetoric down. And it wasn't until the end of the hour-long meeting that I said, we really need to review the actual material in the actual curriculum before we can go forward with this. And then we didn't think that we had the material in front of us. And then one of the secretaries said, oh, we have the curriculum, it's right here. Oh, okay. So we cracked that open, and I could see the first one was the cardiology section, and I could see the cardiologist sitting across the desk from me flipping through the curriculum, And then about 10 minutes later, he looked up, he goes, this is total bullshit. This is dangerous nonsense. And then, after the meeting, we're standing by the elevator, and he confided to me, I didn't believe you until I read what was in the actual curriculum. They thought I was being a Cassandra, saying, oh, this is all horrible and everything, when in fact it was as bad as it was worse than what I was saying it was once they cracked it open and saw what the switch was. They got the bait, they swallowed the bait, and I was showing them what the switch was, and once I actually looked at it, I had won them over. And I actually killed that program for a year. It came back in a new form where I actually had a lot of influence over it. Again, they have to do it, so at least I was able to, I had one of the 6 lectures and do as much damage control as I could. And, it does then, and there was the second symposium, which actually Kimball was with me at, and, I participated in that as well. And it was all not CAM. It was just the touchy-feely stuff, but not the pseudoscientific stuff. Yeah, it was nutrition and exercise and massage, just the things that are, or like Kimball says, stuff that we should just accept and do without having to study it. Music makes people feel better. Okay, we don't need to study that. That's fine. I don't need to call it music therapy. I just saw a headline the other day about older people do much better after dancing therapy. You could throw the word therapy after everything. How about just dancing? It's exercise. It's good for their balance. Okay. We don't need to study that. That's fine.
And we don't need to create a center, right? We don't need
$2.4 billion of taxpayer money to study that kind of stuff either. So, but you see the shtick they have down and the infiltration, man, it's really good. They're doing a great job. We're just playing catch-up. I wish we could say that we were ahead of the game here, but we are really playing catch-up. I think we're making progress, and I think, I was able to do a lot of damage control at Yale. Me, not to blow my own horn. My point is, if I weren't there, it would have sailed through without any problem, because I was the only one who, and even when there were at least several other people at Yale, my last point, who believed exactly like I do. They were not shruggies. They realized that it was BS. They saw the bait and switch. They were staunch proponents of science-based medicine, but they didn't feel empowered to do anything about it because of now this culture of political correctness, which has been cultivated by the proponents. Now it's politically incorrect to criticize CAM. And I have students who are just feel as if they criticize their fellow students who are trying to promote it, they're going to get slammed. and they're shy about it. But I was the only one who basically didn't care, right? Because I care more about this stuff. And I really have no fear that this was like going to adversely affect my career. I really, if I'm not going to sell myself out for something like that. And I also don't think it would happen. Maybe I'm naive or optimistic or whatever. I still think it's academia. And it has been fine, actually. I think, me speaking out has actually been a good thing for me at Yale. But if I didn't have the balls to do it myself, because I was already involved in the skeptical movement and being activist, it would have sailed through past the people who knew it was bullshit but just didn't feel empowered or brave enough to say anything about it, past the shruggies, all because of just a couple of proponents. That's how they're winning the game in academia.
Well, thank you very much to the panel. It was. I wanted to open it up to questions. I think we have a few minutes.
Yeah, please
in
take
a
the
few
mic
minutes.
stand over
We can
there.
take maybe a couple of questions. And while you're assembling, I think that is the point. Unfortunately, there aren't other Steve Novellas out there. We're at a very precarious moment in time where the tides could turn and every academic medical center could just be rife with this stuff. So it's really our responsibility to police the centers that we work in.
Fortunately, thus far, there's little or none of it in my center.
Yet.
But yet, I know, yet.
Hi, so first of all, I realize the example I'm about to give is not nearly as extreme as what you guys are talking about, but it reminds me of it. It's reminiscent. So my father is suffering from bladder cancer right now, and things seem to be going well, but his doctors are telling him to drink lots of soy milk and tomato paste. And I said, that's interesting. Well, do they have studies on this that it actually helps inflammation like they claim? And I don't know. I haven't looked into it, and I'd like to hear what you think. But he says, well, they said, no, it's not strong enough yet, but it's looking in that direction. It's not significant, but it's looking in that direction, so you should say go ahead and do it. In this case, it's probably not going to hurt him. But how prevalent is that sort of stuff, and how kind of wooey do you think that sort of stuff is?
Well, we take... There's a sliding scale of evidence in medicine, right? It's an applied science. It's not a hard science in that we're not trying to find what the ultimate answer is. We need to do stuff. And we need to always act with imperfect information. We never have the perfect absolute information. So what we take approach of, we take the treatments that have the most evidence first, and then we do go down the scale of evidence depending on what kind of evidence we can get. And then we also balance it with a lot of other things. How severe is the thing we're treating? If it's benign and mild anyway, I'm not going to go very far down the scale of evidence. If it's, very destroying their quality of life or it's terminal, you might even do we go as far as what we call compassionate care, which is giving full-on experimental speculative treatments. But if it's somebody who's going to die anyway, and it's a completely incurable treatment, to them, that small chance is worth it because they have nothing to lose. So you see the full spectrum. But you have to put it all into context. What does all the evidence say? What's the plausibility? How safe is it likely to be? What's the probability that it will work? What are we treating? How bad is it? And you do what's called a risk-benefit assessment. And if the risks, or I should say, if the benefits outweigh the risks, and you give the patient full informed consent, and when it's experimental, you do it under proper experimental protocol, which could either be compassionate use or under an approved, IRB-approved protocol, that's all fine. So we don't draw this false dichotomy of it's strictly class 1, full-blown evidence, without any doubt or nothing. But you have to take all that into consideration, which makes it, because it's so complicated though, it makes it really easy for some of the proponents of unscientific modalities to sort of skirt the edges of that and to go a little bit farther down the ladder of evidence, or to not really consider plausibility and make some subtle kinds of changes in the way they think about things, which just biases them in the direction of whatever they're ideologically predisposed to, rather than doing what's really best for the patient, which of course we all think we're doing that, but I do think that's what science-based medicine is ultimately about.
Thanks.
I think we may have time for one more question.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So I'm an assistant professor at Columbia University. I was really glad to see all that up there.
You have my sympathies.
But I'm relatively new, so I didn't really feel attached. I'm 6 months into it. I thought, I can help change stuff. But I'm doing basic research. I'm in clinical pathology. I'm at the Center for Infection and Immunity. And so when I looked at that, I go, well, at least that's not the hard science. That's just like the doctor's clinics. And there's this, in academia, there's kind of this difference between clinical medicine and hard science. But I know that's not that distinct. And what can we do now to start maybe even change this kind of, coming into hard science? Because we are doing chronic fatigue syndrome, we're studying autism, and there's a lot of woo on the fringes of that. And so, I'm thinking right now, could I teach a course next year on this? How do you combat this? Because as somebody who's going through the tenure track, I don't think I want to go up against the dean right now and saying we got to pull this off, the websites. But how can we kind of influence this?
Yeah, I think one of the things that you can do if you're not in a position in which you feel that you can just come right out the way Steve did and try to confront it head on is to get interested in some aspect of it and potentially write a paper or develop a talk in which you don't cede the language war to the other side. So instead of having a talk about CAM in clinical pathology, which, by the way, exists, you could have a talk about implausible medical claims in clinical pathology, or implausible or non-scientific uses of clinical testing, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
there's all sorts of stuff involved in that. You may know that chelationists, for example, typically will do a so-called provocative urine test in which they give a chelating agent to a patient and then get urine an hour later, and find, lo and behold, that it's high in whatever heavy metal or metals that particular chelating agent happens to chelate. Big surprise.
No, the surprise would be if it wasn't high.
Right, the surprise would be if it wasn't high, but they use that as a rationale for saying, oh, this patient suffers from heavy metal toxicity and needs chelating.
It used to be called
for
fraud.
Example.
That's fraud.
Yeah.
Right,
children with autism are the
that's just
victims
out
of
and out
this.
fraud. To the extent that exists, and by the way, it has existed very close to, if not in or under the auspices of Columbia, because that's exactly the kind of thing that Nicholas Gonzalez does. You can make statements about that, and you don't have to use terms like integrative medicine or CAM or anything like that, because those terms are not really the right terms anyway. Those terms are euphemisms. Those terms are advertising slogans.
Yeah, if you cede the language, you've lost 3/4 of the battle.
Right. That's what we're pro science-based medicine. We're not anti.
Well, that's the other thing too. Yeah, that's
right.
Well, I'd like to thank, I don't think we have any time, unfortunately. I'm very sorry. I would love to have had all of you ask questions, but I want to thank the panels. Great panel, very important topic.
Perfect time. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you to our panel on science-based medicine.